Picture a world where meat stays fresh for years, without a single fridge, freezer, or even a whiff of modern technology. It sounds like a survivalist's dream, right? What if I told you this isn't some post-apocalyptic scenario, but rather a simple, old-fashioned way of life that's been going strong for generations? That's right. The Amish have figured out how to keep their meat fresh for ages, all while living off the grid. No electricity, no fridges, just salt, smoke, and a little bit of time. Today, we'll find out how they pull it off. We'll explore how their methods not only preserve meat, but do it in a way that's sustainable, zero waste, and backed by science. Stick with me, because what I'm about to share might just change the way you think about food forever. All right, let's get one thing straight right off the bat. When you think of the Amish, what probably comes to mind is a lifestyle that's deeply rooted in tradition. There are no smartphones, no TVs, no cars, just simple living. And while many might think of it as old-fashioned, there's actually a wealth of knowledge and survival wisdom passed down through the generations. One of the most impressive of those skills? The ability to preserve meat for years without a fridge or freezer. Yes, you heard that right. Years. Without any modern technology at all. And here's the kicker. These methods aren't just effective. They're rooted in nature, relying on old-school processes like salt curing, smoking, drying, pickling, and even burying meat in the ground. And guess what? They work. And they work really well. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Okay, that sounds cool, but how does it actually work? You've seen people using fancy gadgets to preserve food, so it's easy to assume that you need the latest tech to keep food fresh. But the Amish have been doing this for centuries naturally. Over the years, I've had the chance to learn about these techniques firsthand from Amish neighbors. And I can tell you, there's a deep science behind all of it. From the way they manage temperature to the timing of each step. It's not just random guesswork. It's pure ingenuity at its finest. It's a survival skill that could come in handy in a world where power outages, supply chain disruptions, or natural disasters could mess with your modern conveniences. And the coolest part, the Amish do it all sustainably, with zero waste. Every step of the process is thought out to maximize the shelf life of the meat while minimizing harm to the environment. It's a beautiful thing, really. The journey to Amish meat preservation doesn't begin with some magic trick. It all starts with the natural elements, the power of time, and a little bit of knowledge passed down through generations. One of the most important things to understand is that preservation in the Amish community is about balance. They don't just throw some meat on a shelf and hope for the best. They've honed their techniques over centuries, ensuring that each step is done with the utmost care. These methods rely on the natural elements, but they also rely on knowledge, patience, and timing. Now let's start with the first method, salt curing. When we first hear about salt curing, a question comes to mind. How could rubbing salt on meat keep it fresh for months, let alone years? The Amish have figured out that salt does much more than just add flavor. Salt has the incredible ability to draw moisture out of meat, and that's the key to preservation. You see, moisture is the enemy when it comes to keeping meat fresh. When moisture is present, bacteria thrive and spoilage sets in. But when you remove that moisture, you're creating a hostile environment for bacteria. It's all about dehydration, and salt is the perfect tool to make that happen. So here's how it works. The Amish will take a large cut of meat, like ham or pork, and rub it down with a generous amount of salt. They'll also use other seasonings and spices depending on the recipe and the type of meat. But salt is the star of the show. Once it's thoroughly coated, the meat sits for a while, sometimes up to a week, absorbing the salt and losing moisture in the process. This salt curing process essentially sets the stage for the next step, storage. After it's cured, the meat is ready to be hung up in a cool, dry place. Ideally, this place will be a barn or cellar with great airflow, and the meat will remain there for an extended period, often for months. And just like that, you've got cured meat that's safe to eat, free from spoilage, and packed with flavor. But it doesn't end there. As time goes on, the salt continues to draw moisture out, making the environment even more inhospitable to bacteria. So in the right conditions, cured meat can last for a long, long time. And the best part? There's zero waste involved. No plastic wrap, no foil, no wasted resources. Just meat and salt. It's a simple yet effective method. And it's one that has kept families well fed throughout harsh winters and uncertain times for generations. Now let's talk about smoking. This preservation method is also as old as time, and if you've ever had smoked meat, you know it's one of the most flavorful ways to prepare food. But here's the thing. Smoking isn't just about flavor. Smoking meat, especially using the traditional Amish method called cold smoking, is a preservation technique that works wonders for extending the life of meat. It's a slow process. But unlike hot smoking, which cooks the meat, cold smoking is done at a lower temperature. The meat is exposed to smoke from burning wood chips for an extended period, sometimes up to several days, without actually cooking. But the magic happens when the smoke not only adds that delicious smoky flavor, but also coats the meat with natural preservatives. The compounds found in smoke help to protect the meat from spoilage by creating a protective layer that keeps bacteria and mold from getting to the meat. It's like nature's version of a built-in preservative. The key to cold smoking is maintaining the right temperature and humidity. Too high, and you'll cook the meat. Too low, and it won't have the desired effect. It takes a bit of practice, but once you've got the hang of it, cold smoking creates meats that are flavorful, safe to eat, and incredibly long-lasting. Amish families will often cold smoke hams, bacon, sausages, and other cuts of meat. Once they're smoked, they're stored in cool, dry areas, where they can last for months without any refrigeration. This method doesn't just preserve the meat, though. It also creates a product that can be enjoyed year-round. Whether it's summer or winter, smoked meats are perfect for any season. And the fact that they're preserved without refrigeration means they can be enjoyed at any time, no matter what the weather's doing outside. It's a survivalist's dream. But it's also a delicious way to keep food on hand without worrying about spoilage. Drying. If you're still with me, I hope you are, then you're probably wondering how drying fits into the equation. I mean, when we talk about preserving food without modern technology, drying seems like a no-brainer, right? You've likely heard of jerky, the dried meat we all love to snack on. Well, jerky is one of the best examples of how drying works as a preservation method, and trust me, there's so much more to this process than just a simple snack. The basic idea behind drying is pretty simple, yet incredibly effective. Remove the moisture so bacteria can't thrive and spoil the meat. The Amish have been drying meat for centuries, refining the technique and adapting it to suit their needs and environment. Over time, they've turned this into a nearly perfect method for preserving meat. So let's break down how it works step by step and why drying meat is one of the most reliable preservation methods that still holds up today. To start the drying process, the Amish will select cuts of meat that are lean. Think beef, pork, or even poultry. Lean meats are key because fat doesn't dry as well and can turn rancid much faster. Once the meat is selected, it's cut into thin strips. This is important because the thinner the cut, the faster it dries, and that means less chance for bacteria to develop. Sometimes the meat is marinated before drying. This could involve soaking it in a flavorful mix of spices, salt, and other seasonings. Not only does this give the meat an extra layer of flavor, but it also adds a bit of preservation power through the salt and vinegar in the marinade. Once the strips are ready, they are placed in a well-ventilated area, usually somewhere like a barn, shed, or designated drying room. It could even be hung in a smokehouse, where the drying process can occur alongside the gentle infusion of smoke flavor. The key to drying meat is airflow, which ensures the moisture evaporates at a steady pace. This airflow also prevents any mold from developing on the meat, which can happen if the drying process is too slow or the air isn't circulating properly. Depending on factors like climate, the thickness of the meat, and the desired final product, drying can take anywhere from a few days to a couple of weeks. In a dry, cool environment, the process can be relatively quick, but in humid or warm conditions, it may take longer. The goal here is to remove as much moisture as possible, without letting the meat dry out so much that it becomes tough or loses too much flavor. The final result? Dried meat that's not only incredibly tasty, but also durable. It's lightweight, flavorful, and best of all, it lasts for a long time, months, even years, without needing refrigeration. Once dried, the meat is completely preserved and can be stored easily in cloth sacks, jars, or simple containers. No fancy refrigeration units, no preservatives, no added chemicals, just nature doing its thing. The benefits of dried meat go far beyond just long shelf life. First of all, it's incredibly portable. Whether you're heading out on a camping trip, preparing for a long journey, or just looking for a snack, dried meat is a great choice. It's easy to pack, doesn't require special storage, and provides high-energy food that doesn't take up much space. You can throw it in your bag and it'll last for ages. No worries about it going bad in the heat or humidity. But the best part is that dried meat is versatile. You can eat it on its own as a quick snack, or use it in a variety of recipes. Shred it and toss it in soups and stews for added flavor. Rehydrate it in a little water or broth. For a tender, ready-to-eat meal, or even add it to pasta and rice dishes. The possibilities are endless. And if you're into survival food or prepping for emergencies, dried meat is an absolute must-have. And here's the cool part. The flavor of dried meat is totally unique. The Amish often add all sorts of herbs and spices to the meat before drying it. The slow drying process intensifies the natural flavors of the meat. The spices and herbs you add during the marinade phase seep deeper into the fibers of the meat, creating an incredibly rich taste that you just don't get from other methods. When you bite into a piece of dried beef or jerky, you'll taste all the flavors and the love that went into the process. It's like every bite is a little bit of history, a reminder of how people used to preserve food before refrigeration took over. The drying process also brings out a different texture that you won't find with any other preservation method. It's chewy, dense, and satisfying, and because the moisture is mostly gone, it makes the meat much more concentrated. The result is a snack or meal that's filling, and unlike fresh meat, it won't spoil. But here's where things get really interesting. While salt curing, smoking, and drying are all incredibly effective, there's one more preservation method that might just blow your mind: pickling. Now I know what you're thinking. Pickling is just for cucumbers, right? But hold on, because the Amish have taken pickling to a whole new level, using it not only for vegetables, but also for meats like chicken, sausage, and even beef. And just like the other preservation methods, pickling is a natural process that doesn't rely on any modern technology or electricity. It's a simple, old-school way to ensure meat stays fresh and flavorful without the need for refrigeration. Pickling meat involves soaking it in a brine solution, typically made of salt, vinegar, and water. The magic happens thanks to the vinegar's acidity, which works like a powerful natural disinfectant, killing off bacteria and other harmful microorganisms that could cause spoilage. But that's not all. The salt in the brine continues the preservation process by drawing moisture out of the meat. As the moisture leaves, it creates an environment where bacteria can't thrive, giving the meat a longer shelf life. Pickling doesn't just keep the meat safe. It also enhances the flavor in ways that no other preservation method can. As the meat soaks in the brine, it slowly absorbs the flavors of the vinegar, salt, and any spices or herbs added to the mix. You could end up with a tangy, savory taste that makes your taste buds do a happy dance. The result? Meats that are not only preserved but packed with flavor make pickling a fantastic option for anyone looking to experiment with new tastes or add a twist to their meals. And unlike smoking or drying, pickling can be done with a variety of meats, giving you options galore. The beauty of pickling lies in its simplicity. The process can take anywhere from a few days to several weeks, depending on the type of meat and how intensely you want the flavors to infuse. For example, sausages or chicken might only need a few days to soak in the brine, while larger cuts of beef might require a longer period to achieve the right balance of preservation and flavor. During this time, the meat becomes increasingly tender and flavorful, with the brine working its magic. Once the pickling process is complete, you're left with meat that can be stored for months without modern preservation methods. In fact, the brine itself often continues to be a valuable resource, as it can be reused for future batches of pickled meats or vegetables. There's no waste here, just a sustainable, effective, and eco-friendly method of preservation. The reused brine also has an added benefit. Because the salt and vinegar have done most of the hard work already, the brine is loaded with natural preservatives, so it keeps getting better with use. It's almost like a culinary treasure chest that gets more potent and flavorful with each batch. So not only are you preserving food in the most natural way possible, but you're also creating a rich, flavorful solution that can be passed down, much like the pickling techniques themselves. And let's not forget about the added bonus of the flavor. The pickling process adds depth and complexity to the meat, turning something simple into something truly special. What's even more fascinating is the role pickling plays in sustainability. Unlike refrigeration or modern freezing techniques which consume electricity and energy, pickling uses ingredients that are both affordable and natural. Salt, vinegar, and water are all accessible and cost-effective, and these basic ingredients have the power to preserve meat without any need for advanced technology. In a world that's increasingly focused on sustainability and minimizing energy consumption, pickling is a timeless practice that aligns perfectly with those values. By embracing pickling, the Amish have found a way to preserve meat that's completely in tune with the natural environment, requiring no special equipment and no extra resources. It's an incredibly resourceful method and one that has stood the test of time. The fact that it works as well today as it did hundreds of years ago speaks to the effectiveness and wisdom of this simple technique. Pickling doesn't just preserve the meat, it also creates a great, long-lasting product that's ready to eat straight from the jar. Whether you're enjoying a hearty pickled sausage as a snack, adding pickled beef to a salad, or using pickled chicken in sandwiches or wraps, the possibilities are endless. It's a versatile, easy-to-prepare option for anyone looking to create delicious, shelf-stable food that can be enjoyed year-round, regardless of the season or weather conditions. Finally, I've got to talk about one of the most unusual and fascinating preservation methods the Amish use: burying meat in the ground. Yes, you heard that right. It might seem strange at first, but trust me, it works. And there's a surprising amount of science behind it. Here's how it works. The Earth itself acts as a natural refrigerator. Think about it. Just a few feet below the surface, the temperature is far more consistent than what we experience above ground, especially in colder months. The ground stays cooler than the air, and it's almost like a giant underground cooling system, making it the perfect place to store meat. This method is especially effective in the winter and fall. That's when the outside air temperatures are lower, and the earth, like a deep freezer, can keep the meat at a stable, cool temperature. It's kind of like your backyard becoming a very low-tech, super-efficient storage unit. Typically, the Amish will bury smaller cuts of meat, like pork, chicken, or even beef, in a shallow pit. This meat is carefully wrapped, usually in heavy moisture-resistant cloth or burlap sacks. It's important that the meat is wrapped securely because while the ground helps keep it cool, you don't want to take any chances with contamination. A good tight wrap ensures no dirt, microbes, or even pests can get to the meat. After it's wrapped up securely, the meat is placed in a shallow hole and covered with soil. Sometimes they'll place stones or heavy objects on top to keep the earth packed tightly and prevent any accidental diggers from getting to it. Once the meat is buried, it stays there for weeks, sometimes even months. The key to this method is the temperature of the ground. The deeper you go, the cooler and more consistent the temperature becomes. That means no matter how hot or cold it is on the surface, the temperature underground stays relatively stable, making it an ideal spot to store meat for extended periods. One of the most fascinating things about this method is how the cool earth acts as a natural preservative. The longer the meat stays buried, the more the temperature works its magic. The meat becomes chilled, but not frozen, allowing the enzymes to slow down without the risk of freezer burn or drying out. At the same time, the wrap keeps the meat dry and sealed, which further reduces the risk of spoilage. The Amish use this technique primarily during the colder months when the ground temperature is low enough to keep the meat safe. But here's the interesting part. This method doesn't just preserve the meat, it also enhances its flavor. The slow aging process combined with the cool storage conditions creates a more flavorful product. Imagine how aging beef in a wine cellar brings out richer flavors. Well, the ground acts similarly, offering a very natural environment for the meat to mature and develop a deeper taste. When the time comes to retrieve the meat, the Amish will dig it up, and assuming it was wrapped and stored properly, it's ready to eat. You might think it would be spoiled, or at least have an odd, earthy taste. But surprisingly, it's perfectly safe, and often tastes even better than it did before. The texture is firm, the flavor is rich, and the preservation is on point. Of course, this technique is not as commonly used today as it once was, and it requires a lot of trust in the process and the environment. There's no denying the beauty and effectiveness of this preservation method, but it's one of the oldest methods of food preservation, and it's still used by some Amish families who want to stay connected to their roots and the natural world. This perfectly illustrates the idea that sometimes the most effective methods are the simplest, and we don't always need modern technology to achieve the same results. So what's the takeaway from all this? Well, the Amish have truly mastered the art of working with nature, not against it. Each preservation method they use has its own specific time, place, and rhythm, perfectly aligned with the changing seasons. It's a holistic system that's been refined and perfected over generations, proving that sometimes the old ways aren't just charming traditions, but incredibly smart solutions that have withstood the test of time. It reflects the wisdom of nature and the enduring effectiveness of methods that have been handed down through centuries. So the next time you find yourself wondering how to preserve food the old-fashioned way, remember, sometimes the simplest solutions are the most sustainable and the most enduring. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on new uploads.